reduced time spent in purgatory after death. Purgatory being a kind of halfway house for those not evil enough for hell, not good enough for heaven, so forced to wait. The lower classes might pay a smaller fee to buy forgiveness for their sins. Indulgences were a major source of church income. For this particular campaign, Leo unleashed a squadron of expert indulgence salesmen across Europe, and the money began to pour in. As his chief architect for the completion of St. Peter's, he appointed the great artist Raphael, who planned to make the building a splendid work of art, Leo's lasting legacy to the world. All was going well until in October 1517, news reached the Pope that a priest named Martin Luther, some tiresome German theologian, had tacked to the doors of the castle church in Wittenberg a tract called the 95 Theses. Like many important documents of the time, the tract was originally in Latin, but it had been translated into German, printed up, and passed out among the public, and within a few weeks all Germany seemed to have read it. The 95 Theses was essentially an attack on the practice of selling indulgences. It was up to God, not the church, to forgive sinners, Luther reasoned, and such forgiveness could not be bought. The tract went on to say that the ultimate authority was Scripture. If the Pope could cite Scripture to refute Luther's arguments, the priest would gladly recant them. The Pope did not read Luther's writings. He preferred poetry to theological discussions. And a single German priest surely posed no threat to the use of indulgences to fund worthy projects, let alone to the church itself. But Luther seemed to be challenging the church's authority in a broad sense, and Leo knew that an unchecked heresy could become the center of a sect. Within recent centuries in Europe, the church had had to put down such dissident sects by the use of force. Better to silence Luther before it was too late. Leo began relatively gently, asking the respected Catholic theologian Sylvester Mazzolini, usually known as Prierius, to write an official response to Luther that he hoped would frighten the priest into submission. Prierius proclaimed that the Pope was the highest authority in the Church, even higher than Scripture. In fact, that the Pope was infallible. He quoted various theological texts written over the centuries in support of this claim. He also attacked Luther personally, calling him a bastard and questioning his motives. Perhaps the German priest was angling for a bishopric? Prierius concluded with the words, "Whoever says that the Church of Rome may not do what it is actually doing in the manner of indulgences is a heretic." The warning was clear enough. Leo had much on his mind during these years, including turmoil in the Ottoman Empire and a plan to launch a new crusade. But Luther's response to Prierius got his attention right away. Luther wrote a text in which he mercilessly took apart Prierius's writings. The Church, he argued, had failed to answer his charges and to base its arguments on Scripture. Unless its authority in granting indulgences and excommunicating heretics was rooted in the Bible, it was not spiritual in nature, but worldly, political, and that kind of authority could and should be challenged. Luther published his text alongside Prierius, allowing readers to compare the two and come to their own conclusions. His direct quotation of Prierius, his audacious and mocking tone, and his use of recently developed printing technology to spread his message far and wide, all this was quite shocking and new to church officials. They were dealing with a clever and dangerous man. It was now clear to Leo that the war between the Church and Luther was a war to the death. As the Pope pondered how to get the German priest to Rome and try him as a heretic, Luther accelerated his campaign, continuing to publish at an alarming rate, his tone even more vitriolic. In an open letter to the Christian nobility of the German nation, he claimed that Rome had used its spurious authority to bully and cow the German people for centuries, turning Germany's kingdoms into vassal states. The Church, he said again, was a political power, not a spiritual one, and to prop up its worldly rule, it had resorted to lies, forged documents, whatever means necessary. On the Babylonian Captivity of the Church, he railed against the Pope's lavish lifestyle, the whoring among the church hierarchy, the blasphemous art Leo funded. The Pope had gone so far as to have staged an immoral and bawdy play by Machiavelli called Mandragola within the Vatican itself. Luther juxtaposed the righteous behavior advocated by the Church with the way its cardinals actually lived. It was the Pope and his entourage, Luther charged, who were the real heretics, not he. In fact, the Pope was the Antichrist. It seemed to Leo that Luther had responded to Prierius's threat by raising the temperature. Clearly, the threat had been weak. The Pope had been too lenient. It was time to show real force and end this war. So Leo wrote a papal bull threatening Luther with excommunication. He also sent church officials to Germany to negotiate the priest's arrest and imprisonment. These officials, however, came back with shocking news that altered everything. In the few short years since the publication of the 95 Theses, Martin Luther, an unknown German priest, had somehow become a sensation, a celebrity, a beloved figure throughout the country. Everywhere the Pope's officials went, they were heckled, even threatened with stoning. Shop windows in almost every German town contained paintings of Luther with a halo over his head. 9/10 of the Germans shout, "Long live Luther," one official reported to Leo, and the other 10th, "Death to Rome." Luther had somehow aroused the German public's latent resentment and hatred of the Church, and his reputation was impeccable. He was a best-selling author, yet he refused the income from his writings, clearly practicing what he preached. The more the Church attacked him, the more popular Luther became. To make a martyr of him now could spark a revolution. Nevertheless, in 1521, Leo ordered Luther to appear in the town of Worms before the imperial diet, a gathering of German princes, nobles, and clergy organized by the newly elected Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Leo hoped to get the Germans to do his dirty work, and Charles was amenable. A political creature, worried by the anti-authoritarian sentiments that Luther had sparked, he wanted the dispute over. At the Diet, he demanded that the priest recant his teachings. But Luther, as usual, refused, and in dramatic fashion, uttered the memorable line, "Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. God help me." The emperor had no choice. He condemned Luther as a heretic and ordered him to return to Wittenberg to await his fate. On the way home, however, Luther was kidnapped and taken to Warburg Castle. The kidnapping had actually been planned and executed by his many supporters among the aristocracy. He was safe. Living in the castle under an assumed name, he was able to ride out the storm. Leo died that year, and within months of his death, Luther's ideas and the reforms that he had advocated had spread throughout Germany like wildfire. By 1526, a Protestant party was officially recognized in different parts of Europe. This was the birth of the Reformation, and with it the vast worldly power of the Catholic Church, at least as Leo had inherited it, was irrevocably broken. That obscure, pedantic Wittenberg priest had somehow won the war. Interpretation. Luther's original intention in his 95 Theses was to discuss a point of theology, the relationship, or lack of it, between God's forgiveness and papal indulgences. But when he read Prierius's response to his argument, something changed in him. The Pope and his men had failed to find justification for indulgences in the Bible. There was much more they could not justify as well, such as the Pope's unlimited power to excommunicate. Luther came to believe that the Church needed drastic reform. Reformation, however, would require political power. If Luther simply railed at the Church's wickedness from the pulpit or among his fellow priests, he would get nowhere.